Please could we be given warning at the beginning of a programme if there's going to be anything about the Beatles, as all Beatle fans can make sure to listen, and have a chance to ring up other fans to make sure they are also listening.
Hi everybody, this is John here. This is Paul, George,
and Ringo.
And we're very happy to be on your program once again.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Beatle News Briefs. Each time out bringing you important Beatle guests and great discussions about the Beatles world. I'm your host, Steve Marinucci, and we have a fantastic show today featuring a discussion with Madeline Bocaro, the author of In Your Mind, The Infinite Universe of Yoko Ono. Her book not only delves into Yoko's life, but also is a revealing portrait of Yoko as a person. Madeline has talked extensively with her and will give some great insights on the real Yoko Ono. But there's more. In a special added segment, we'll have portions of an interview Yoko Ono did with former Capital EMI executive Joe Smith in October of 1987. You'll hear in Yoko's own words her thoughts about meeting John Lennon, the Beatles breakup, the Double Fantasy album, and the plans they had made which never happened because of John's passing. This is something you will certainly want to hear. Now let's get started. Here's my talk with Madeline Bocaro. Madeline, welcome. It's
Thank you so much.
good to talk to you. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm coming off 3 days of Best for Beatles fans. I've been there a few years in a row selling the book there and getting a pretty good reception. And yeah, saw the One-to-One documentary a few weeks ago, going to the IMAX premiere this week again.
How long did it take you to put that book together? 500 pages.
Well, I didn't really know I was writing a book. I had been writing about Yoko all my life, some for publication, some not, just Facebook groups. I started, people were asking what certain artworks were about, what certain songs were about, and I write these little pieces. And one day I got some software that allowed me to put everything in there and see what I had. And I had a 500-page book, basically. I just moved the chapters around. I reviewed every album consecutively when it came out. I wrote in my diaries what she was up to. I loved her and John, so I would record all these news programs off the radio, saw them on TV all the time, saw the Bettins on TV when I was a kid. And I just remembered everything that was important that she had to say about her own work and her own art, and especially the interviews where they let her speak. And I had this 2 more years it took me to organize it and flesh it out. And there it is. I just don't think you can start at day one and say, page 1, Yoko was born.
Right. So you basically started this as a fan project, correct?
Yeah, I basically just started it as loving her and saving everything I could ever find and living through it and absorbing it as it happened. And also being a product of the times, growing up in the 60s and 70s and knowing what they were up against. And it's an amazing, fascinating story. There are so many facets to it. There's the love story of John and Yoko. There's the Beatles connection. There's her ancestry, which is incredible. One of the 3 wealthiest families in Japan, yet she was starving during the war with her siblings in a farmhouse. But her ancestors were also very important people in their own right and went through some of those, which it's usually boring. But no, these were, Nobel Prize winning people. One of the first Japanese people into the UN was one of her uncles. Her great-great-grandfather was a banking billionaire. And there's amazing stories behind it. So there was that, and there was her other 2 husbands, the kidnapping of her daughter by her first husband, and their reunion in the end, and a lot of the FBI chasing that. It's just every 5 seconds you can think of another topic that they can make a whole documentary on just about John and Yoko. There were 2 in 1972, the 2 that are out now, Daytime Revolution and One-to-One about the concert, which I attended when I was 14. So... so much.
But what was it initially that attracted you to her? Was it before she met John, or was it after she met?
It was probably, she probably had met him, but I saw an article in Time magazine. It was a 1967 article, and I might have seen it in 1968, but I got it out of my aunt's magazine. And she was
Mhm.
in front of her film Bottoms with the naked behinds walking. And I was just like, this is great. She had a little mischievous smile on her face, and I saved the article. And then pretty soon after, I got the White Album, and I heard that female voices were singing on it. And one of them was this Japanese artist, Yoko Ono. And I said, wow, that's her. And she's with John Lennon. This is great. I can find out everything she's doing. So I started to, follow everything they did.
And the one thing that, there have been books written about her, one that just came out, but yours is not a standard biography. You get into her mind, basically, and show people what she is.
Yeah.
And it's weird that, experiencing her is different than reading about her. It's really, and as we were talking before we started here, and I mentioned to you that I've interviewed her a couple of times. I also saw her. Were you aware that she did a lecture at Stanford?
Mhm.
I was at that lecture, and that was amazing because she did the cut piece live in front of us.
Nice.
And, you read about this thing before and you figure, oh, this is weird, really weird. But to see it in person was like astounding. That was just amazing. And I also saw her in concert with Sean. And that was, that was something else too. The lecture though was really quite an event.
Once you encounter her, there's different levels to it. People have just met her for briefly, 5 seconds, just an exchange, but they say it was so intense. She was so warm and welcoming, and she caused a wave of calm to come over me. She's just like that. And if you spend 5 minutes with her, you know why John was fascinated by her. She's just magical.
What do you consider the difference between Cynthia and Yoko?
Well, Cynthia was the posh upper class girl, like that John kind of followed and fell in love with. But John was basically kooky at heart. He was an artist, and he was a little bit wild. And after a while, he became bored with married life with a kid in the suburbs, and he was looking for more. And he found her. He wasn't really looking. They just kind of met at her art exhibition, and that's what melded their minds. He realized, oh my God, this woman is, well, she realized that John got her when he took a bite of her apple, when he wanted to hammer imaginary nail in. But what he got from her is the freedom to be himself.
The impression that she gave me was that she was going to be equal to him.
Oh, yeah.
And that, I think, is one of the primary things that attracted him to her, is that she is her own person, and she has her own feelings, and she's not afraid to let them out.
Yeah.
And you can tell in the way when she talks. And I think that caught a lot of people off guard, especially back in the beginning, because they were expecting her to be a subservient woman. And she is not that way. She never has been.
Right. But you picture her as dominant and controlling, whatever, but she was really just confident in her own. She wanted to put forth the message of healing and making the world a better place. And it's so contrived that they made her into something opposite. They really didn't understand her work at all. They didn't give her a chance. And they were really both just trying to do good. And they were all very truthful and honest. And so many lies were written about them, despite them being honest about themselves. They admitted to taking drugs. They admitted they weren't the greatest parents. They admitted their faults. Yet the media wanted to make them out worse than they were, and it boggles my mind.
Let's talk about her art. Her art is something that, when people talk about Yoko, they don't understand it. But I think there's a very simple philosophy to it. I think the phrase that you can use to describe her artwork is "let it be," because that's basically what she does. Box of Smiles, you look in a mirror.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the things she asks you to do, I mean, the bottoms thing, for example, is not something that people understand right away, but it's so much of her art is just kind of, to show what's out there. The wish tree is another thing that,
Yeah,
every
it's
so
all
little while-
participatory. It's unfinished. She wants you to get something out of it. She wants you to participate. And I was just thinking that when you go to a surrealist exhibition or impressionist or expressionist, you don't come out feeling like, well, that was for me. You're just looking at art on a wall and you like some of it, you don't like some of it. That's it. The artist is showing you something
Mhm.
artistic, let's say. But she wanted art to be not to have monetary value, not to be bought and sold, not to be on a wall, but it's an action, it's a communication. And this is what she put forth. And a lot of her pieces were like mend piece, wrapping piece. Those were about healing and, just catharsism. And most of her work came from her own traumas in childhood. She realized everything is transient. You can't hold on to anything. So everything was like a whisper, or it would disappear, or it was invisible. Her half a room, she had everything cut in half, painted white, all the furniture, everything in the room. And she's showing you the half that's invisible, and you're seeing the half that's there. So a lot of her work, it's just described to most people. They read about it, but you have to experience it in context. And you go through these white spaces. Now there's exhibitions everywhere. There's one in Berlin. This huge one just ended in Tate Modern. It's traveling to Chicago this year. Just experience it. It's getting amazing reviews. And now people are finally understanding what she was about.
How do you think she affected John and the Beatles? Let's go with John first. How did she affect?
They had similar backgrounds, right? The parental abandonment issues, basically. So they were very lonely, and they were lonely together too, because they were in the middle of the eye of the hurricane, really, by themselves. So I think they opened up definitely through art, but mostly through music, because John gave Yoko a beat, and she came down from the 12-tone composers and the avant-garde vocalizing and all that. And then she freed him from the beat to do more kind of esoteric kind of things and get deep into his soul, like the Plastic Ono Band album, his first one, get raw and get real and communicate through a song. So that's mainly what they did, but they nourished each other. They validated each other. They respected, they were each other's biggest fans. Yoko was becoming a musician. John was becoming an artist. I mean, they really melded and gave each other everything they had.
That Yoko Ono Plastic Ono Band album is really wonderful. It's gotten a little more attention to where people enjoy it, but I remember when it was released that nobody kind of gave it much attention, but Ringo's on it. It's a great album.
Yeah, Sean says she goes from not knowing anything about rock and roll to inventing punk rock. She's just really, she's sampling on there. She's got tape loops. She's, stretching tapes across the studio, cutting and making it work. Because when you hear those original sessions, they're just really raw sessions. But what she's got on there is kind of like haunting in a way. She's got so much effects, and Ringo almost didn't even recognize his own drumming with all the echo on it. So that was way ahead of its time, though. Some people still can't relate to that, but they don't know that she has other double albums full of songs with different genres. She's got rock,
Right.
ballads, gorgeous ballads, She evolved, and if she had put out her albums in reverse order, maybe she would have been more accepted. But it had to go the way it did.
What about the Beatles? She had an effect on the Beatles, maybe not something that everybody realized, but it was there.
Well, when the Beatles, Paul was into avant-garde before John was even, and he would
Right.
check going to all these, concerts of these composers, and he's got tape loops and things that he's messing with by himself. And he said, John was out in the suburbs in his pipe and slippers, and I was doing all this stuff. And I said to him, hey, I'm thinking of releasing some of this stuff. And John, calling it Paul McCartney goes too far. And John said, go ahead, man, do it. John was all for it. But then, of course, Yoko comes along. Then John starts doing Revolution 9 and this and that. And Paul's like, hey, wait a minute. He's got the credit for even the avant-garde one, and I'm soppy, So it was inching its way into the Beatles anyway with Paul. I don't know if he was really going to apply it in such a stark manner as on Revolution 9. In fact, he was against that. But influence on the Beatles after when she was around, there was what they were doing Magical Mystery Tour, right? She went to the Fool on the Hill session. She didn't change Magical Mystery Tour all that much. In fact, she never heard Strawberry Fields till after the fact. And an art dealer played it for her and said, what do you think of this pop music? And she said, that's pretty cool for a pop tune. All the dissonance and the strange sounds. She really liked it. But that was way after. She didn't know anything about that until, then they do Sergeant Pepper, and then they do whatever. And Yoko has no effect on that. But you want to say she affected, them badly. But really, she was just sitting there in the studio with John because he asked her to come along. He was very insecure and jealous, and he wanted her with him all the time. And if you can see in the Get Back sessions, she's just sitting there knitting, crocheting, whatever she's doing, reading. And she even said, I was in a dream world. I wasn't thinking what the Beatles were doing. I was thinking of my next artwork. So effect on the Beatles, they made her affect them mentally more than she really did. They were just so against having her around. So they let it get to them, but she wasn't doing anything to them.
I was thinking that she might have had some effect on Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except Me and My Monkey.
Well, I'm sure John wrote that about her and himself.
Well, that's not what I was thinking, but I was just thinking the music and what he did with the audio on that.
I don't hear that as much. I hear, of course, because the elements of nature, the wind is high, the sun is, and also she had played Moonlight Sonata, and he told her play the arpeggios backwards, and that gave him the idea for the melody.
Yes.
There were other things like Julia, of course, is beautiful. It was about her and his mother. She was there. That's all. And John asked her, is this good? And she would tell him if she liked it or not. But I don't think she really infiltrated or tried to push herself in the music.
She had to deal with the traumatic vision of seeing John killed. And she, after that, took over his legacy. She was instrumental. Well, she was the reason that the Lost Linen tapes came out, which really was an incredible thing. Although Paul has gone into his archives and released a lot of stuff, she gave it away on the radio, which was really kind of amazing.
I had a lot of sympathy with John's fans because she felt like we all went through the same loss. And, she felt that she should put out something every year to keep his legacy alive, and also for the fans to have something to hold on to. So that was beautiful.
And right up until now, because Now and Then is really because of her, because she gave the tapes of Free as a Bird, Real Love, and Now and Then. And without her doing that, we wouldn't have those songs. When I went to Beatle Fest, Cynthia Lennon was there, and Cynthia mentioned Yoko. The noise was just awful. There was a very hostile reaction to Yoko then. But she has done so many positive things. I mean, look at the being on Twitter every day and taking questions from the fans. I mean, you don't see anybody else doing that,
And before that, answering letters, answering almost every letter. We were pen pals for a long time. So, when she realized that you liked her and her music and understood her meanings, she was all in. She loved it. I miss her. I mean, she's pretty much retired, so I miss all the everyday stuff, but she's got to have peace now, at this age, and she's 92. But Dan Richter, their assistant, you see him in the Imagine film. He took the photograph of the Imagine album cover. He's such a big fan of my book because he loves her so much. And he said, he thanked me for my book. And he said, Madeline not only understands Yoko, but she's got into the deep in her soul, which is very important. And he says, Yoko wants the world to be a better place. And she wants people to be okay and love each other. That's really it. And he said, my book has helped communicate that.
You've had other reaction though from the Lennon family, correct?
Sean totally supports it. He said, your book is beautiful. We love it. Thank you for caring enough to be so meticulous. And he's always retweeting my stuff. And I met Kyoko a few weeks ago and she...
Oh, did you?
Yeah, it was really sweet. She called it a treasure, which meant the world to me. And her children have it, which is Yoko's grandchildren. So, I can't ask for more. I mean, Elliot Mintz really praised it. He calls it a masterpiece. His book is great too. So we're all, Team Yoko. Even the new book by David Sheff, that's a fraction of my book. It's like a third of the length. But, he loves her as well. And he's trying to spread the truth, which is that, she's been vilified for fake reasons. And a lot of his book focuses on the suffering and the injustices that she had to be put through. And it's really sad to read. Like the second half of his book, I don't mention these people's names because I won't give them the time of day, but he goes through them. The thieves, the conspirators to slander her and John, stealing his diaries, doing, kidnapping threats, death threats, extortion, so he goes into that in depth. And it's really painful to read because he was with her and he shows how broken and sad she was and scared. So, there's that aspect of it too.
The question then to ask is, what do you want people to take away from your book?
Her wisdom, because not only do I want to say she's not bad, she was good, but there is so much wisdom and things that she has to say. And I used a lot of her voice in the book. It's like her telling her story really. And just beautiful thing, like just showing us our misplaced values and showing us that water is more valuable than gold. Like simple things that we don't even think of. How important things that are invisible really are, like the air. If we didn't have air, forget it. If the air is not invisible, we're in trouble because it's poison. So, but it goes at length, her views about raising children, her views about peaceful methods of getting peace, and it all makes complete sense, and it's all from left field. A lot of it, she John used to say she like comes from another planet sometimes with this information, but it's really amazing. And there's a chapter in my book called Premonitions, and it's all about these things that she's said in lyrics or even John has that have come true like 50 years later, whether good or bad, and it's really eerie how many of these instances there are. And that she relied upon psychics and tarot card readers and directionalists and all this, and in a way it was beneficial to her. Maybe it was just something to hold on to, but it also opened her up for a lot of people taking advantage of her in that way too.
Did you do any interviews with her for the book, or did you have talked to her, correct?
Oh, yeah. I spent a lot of time with her backstage at concerts, at art exhibitions. She invited me to all of her exhibitions and ones that she did of John's work, and openings of things, premieres, and but mostly backstage at concerts. We talked a lot. When everybody went home, she was hanging out, and we'd talk about. I tell her about how much I loved her films and what this means, did this mean that, and she always understood that I got her. I really understood her, so she loved that. And I just have a lot of insights, but just knowing her, and I just wanted this beautiful part of her to be shown for what it is. It's a really beautiful book. People are saying it's the Bible of Ono, first of all, or that it's also the Bible of wellness. They feel healed when they're done reading it, because in a lot of ways, she had to create a means of help for herself to get out of the depths of despair from childhood onward. And she used some useful methods that she's sharing, and that are really, really helpful. There's like a lot, even her tweets, they're like little messages from fortune cookies, but really powerful ones where you can really ruminate on it and take it away and apply it to your own life. So that's what I wanted to show, that she's very helpful.
I noticed today when looking your book up on Amazon that there is no Kindle version. Will there be a Kindle version?
I'm working on possibly an ebook, but yeah, I don't know about Kindle, but definitely ebook.
Definitely ebook. Okay. That's good to hear.
It's the type of book that you really need to take time with. And if somebody's reading it to you, it's going to go by and you're not going to absorb. Because some people say, oh, I wanted to read 10 pages tonight, but I got through 5 and I just kept having to stop and reread and rethink. They finish it and they want to read it again because it's so packed with great information.
That almost sounds like Yoko saying that.
Yeah, but not just Yoko, but just like little funny things like in the 60s, there's a quote from Andy Warhol that said everybody was on amphetamines because if you went to sleep, you'd miss half of what was happening because there was so much happening. Or just like the song John Sinclair, what John, sang to get him released from being jailed for chewed marijuana for 10 years. But ironically, John Sinclair, before he passed away recently, was one of the first people in Detroit to line up to buy legal marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
So, things like that. There's just so many puzzle pieces that fit together and so many outcomes that you would never have imagined. And it's an amazing, amazing story.
Is there anything that you'd like to touch on that I did not?
Wow. Maybe that I have a chapter about every album and I go through every song, and it's mostly her speaking about the songs and musicians and how they were. So that's really interesting. And I didn't just slap it in the back like a discography. It's every album is in the place of her history. So in the year that it came out, what was happening in that year, there's the album. So, and everything she did with John is in there too. So the project.
What is your favorite album?
Of Yoko's album?
Yeah.
It would be approximately Infinite Universe.
Okay.
Double one. Well, Fly is double too. I love that as well.
I think, like I said earlier, I think the Yoko Ono Plastic Ono Band album is mine. Mm-hmm. But I also like Walking on Thin Ice. I love Walking on Thin Ice, actually. Despite the circumstances it was recorded under. Right. I love the partnership between John and Yoko on that track. It's just a bit with John playing that really edgy guitar and everything like that. I mean, that's just a wonderful song. Now you'll hear Yoko Ono talking with former Capitol EMI executive Joe Smith in 1987 about her life with John Lennon and the Beatles. This interview is part of the complete Joe Smith collection of audio interviews with more than 240 recording artists that is housed in the Library of Congress. These are available to listen and download free at www.loc.gov. We thank the Library of Congress and Joe Smith's son Jeff for allowing us to bring this interview with Yoko to you. These interviews were published in a book called Off the Record, but only in excerpts. Our segment includes portions that were not in the book. The full Yoko interview can be found in the Library of Congress and also in a podcast with many of the Joe Smith interviews, which you should be able to find at your local podcast provider. Madeline Bocaro and I will be back following this segment and will give our thoughts on the Yoko interview. Here's Yoko and Joe Smith.
I interviewed Paul McCartney, and he talked about writing songs with John, and then when that combination broke up, it was impossible for him to replace it. What did he miss about being with the Beatles? Was it interplay, songwriting? What was it, if anything?
Well, for John it was like a divorce, and I think that he was feeling very good about it, as if a big weight was off him. But at the same time, he was very proud of the group. He felt that there was not a group that would be compared to their group. And also, he had an extremely high opinion about each one of them, which might be surprising. I mean, he used to say, well, they're very sort of intelligent kids, you know. The fact that they come from Liverpool, you think they wouldn't understand these things. They do, you know, that sort of attitude. He was always protective of them in that sense. I don't really think he had voiced anything that he really missed about the Beatles. Maybe that was because I was the other party that he got the divorce for, you know, or whatever. But at the same time, that's a very bad thing that I said, you know, like he got a divorce for marrying me, so it sounds like, yes,
no, things like that.
You know, I was, I fell into the trap right away about saying, oh, does that mean that you broke up the Beatles? I didn't break up the Beatles. The Beatles were getting very independent. Each one of them were getting very independent. And John, in fact, was not the first one who wanted to leave the Beatles. Ringo one night with Maureen came to John and me and sort of said, well, he wants to leave. And also George was the next. And then John. Yeah. Paul was the only one who was trying to hold the Beatles together. But then again, the other three felt that Paul was trying to hold the Beatles together as his band. They were getting to be like Paul's band, which they didn't like. You know. So there was an incredible period of unpleasantness for John. So he was in fact delighted that he was out of it. I think that in a funny sort of way, I felt the weight of it, weight of the breakup, because he was communicating and having an extremely intense, stimulating exchange with three very intelligent guys, very quick guys. And now he expected all that to be replaced by me. And so our communication was very heavy, and it went very well. But at the same time, initially when we got together, that he would go to the studio and he would be playing with the other three. I had a little time off, in a way. But that was gone, you know.
Well, that had to be a heavy load to...
it was a very heavy load, yes.
That.
But also it was a challenge, you know. And also, I did understand the situation. It was like Duke of Windsor announcing to the world that I am, you know, I am with this woman, of course, who is not going to feel honored and make sure that I respond to his expectation.
Well, there was also a dark side of that, too. You were painted as a villain in many quarters. It was Yoko that broke up the Beatles. How did you react to that?
Well, that was something that was going around in the world probably not just in whispers, in many loud statements, but we were sort of together, and the closeness of it. And of course the people around us are not going to spell it out to us. So in a way we were shielded and protected from that sort of street talk.
But you knew it was out there somewhere.
Of course we were aware of it, but it didn't hurt me so much in the sense of somebody who are personally close to us saying something nasty.
What had been your pre-meeting John? What had been your perception of the Beatles? Had you been a fan? Had you known very much about them?
I didn't know very much about them. That seems to be something that nobody can believe, and most people keep saying, well, how dare she would say such a thing? Of course she must have known, etc. Of course I knew the Beatles as the social phenomenon, just like I knew about Elvis. But I knew very little about Elvis anyway. But I read the newspapers about these long-haired kids or something.
Where were you living
at the time? At the time, the first time I read something in the papers was in Japan. It was a very small article that said that these 4 boys with mop hair, is it? A strange haircut was becoming extremely popular. And then I think I just sort of scanned some article in Light magazine when I was here, I think. But that's the big famous article about the Beatles in Light magazine. I just know that I didn't read it thoroughly or anything. It's just there was something about Brian Epstein, a clever guy who made this group happen, and one of them were supposed to be very intelligent or something, and that was John.
That was John.
Yeah.
You've probably told it a lot of times, but it comes out different in a lot of ways, too. How did you meet? I mean, that's such a trite question, but...
Well, as you know, that I met him when I was doing a gallery show in Indica Gallery, and it was the opening night. And I'm sorry, I chain smoke, and I'm sure it's very unpleasant coming from LA and all that. And it was about an hour before the opening, and I was very busy trying to make sure that everything was all right. It was an hour before the opening is in a gallery, to me, was like an hour before going on stage. So I was very busy and nervous. And then John Dunbar brought this guy in, and I don't think John Dunbar he definitely did not properly introduce me to John. They were just sort of looking around independently. And then John asked me a question about one of the paintings, and if he could hammer a nail in. And I just sort of said, no, please don't, because before the opening, and I don't want any nails in there. And John Dunbar was sort of saying, what a drag or something. So I said, oh, okay, well then, pay me 5 shillings and you can. And that was just a ritual. I mean, it's not like I needed the 5 shillings. It was just on principle. I thought my paintings, because they were statements, very conceptual, and there was no way of selling it. So about a month before that, I was thinking, maybe the next show I would sort of ask people to pay for what they do to my paintings. But I wasn't going to do that until he said, could I hammer a nail in? And I sort of tried that one, and he said, well, could I hammer an imaginary nail in and pay you an imaginary money? So I thought, oh, that's pretty good.
Lock them up. And you didn't know who this was?
At the time, I didn't.
First impressions?
The impression was surprisingly, You talk about meeting so many people in a gallery show, all the visitors. And it was a show that was fairly word of mouth kind of known. Oh, it's not just word of mouth, it was written about, etc. So, and a lot of very interesting people came, but I did remember John because he had a very gentle kind of warm look, and I don't know why, but I just sort of thought, well, if I'm not busy, and also I was married then, but the pity I could have an affair with a guy like this, but that's that, you know. I was more involved in my work at the time, and it wasn't the time to sort of start some
Later on,
energy-consuming affairs.
Did you feel you were being criticized by the outside world at all for leading this Beatle down the path? Did you ever get that sense that people were knocking you for?
Well, definitely there was a tendency of if we did something that they didn't like, it was me, and if it was something successful, it was John. There was that, of course. And but it was a learning process. I really think that life is a process of learning, and we are given, each of us are given the light in which we learn the things that we have to learn. And probably John and I have to learn those things. Especially me, probably I have to learn experience of humiliation. and probably it was good that I learned it, because otherwise I would have stayed the proud Yoko Ono, you know. And it was good for my pride, I think, to learn lessons like that.
What happened between 1975 and 1980? People were not making records, especially. Was there ever a chance that they were ever going to get together again? Everybody, so many people in the world were trying to put pressure on them to get together once, twice, make a record, a concert. Was there ever close to it?
Well, John was adamant that he just would not want it to repeat the past. And I don't know, maybe Paul might have felt that he wanted to get together. But on the side of John, I think it was very adamant. And at one point, when we were separated in 1974, I think, between 1973 and 1975, like 18 months or something like that, I think it was a marvelous chance to see if John wants to go back to the Beatles. But he had no desire for that, and in fact, he immediately got so expected to do something together. And then I think he was thinking of doing something with Harry Nilsson or something like that. But it seems like it never crossed his mind, that one.
And was it ever discussed early on, after they had broken up in 1970, or really for all intents and purposes, did he ever discuss much about it? Because there certainly was a cry to put them together, get them back together again.
You see, I think John was right. I think John had an instinct that if the Beatles went on, and of course in the later stage of the Beatles it was very difficult anyway, and the Beatles did remember that time, that period when it was very difficult. If the Beatles went on, even logistically there was some difficulty, because in early days Paul and John wrote the songs, rather John and Paul, and George didn't write much, and Ringo especially didn't write at all. But then George started to write a lot of songs, so in the end it was like, who's going to get the space? And John was really trying to protect George and not ignore him and put as many songs of George as possible. But simply there wasn't much space for them in one album, and they can't keep on making double albums. So in a way, all three of them were sort of outgrowing the Beatles. And then Ringo was getting interested in films. And George was more interested in playing with Ravi Shankar. And in fact, I mean, that was very, very logical, because in the group, George is still George, Ringo is Ringo. But when they go outside, Ringo is the Beatle and George is the Beatle, and they're treated differently. And in fact, George did mention that to us. You know, I feel much more comfortable playing with those guys because they understand me and this and that. You know, where here I'm like treated like a backing group for Paul. And that was the kind of complaint that was expressed many times. So in the beginning, initially, when all four of them probably were much more insecure, they were sort of compromising and just uniting to make it. And then when they made it, of course, they blossomed, and each one of them became the king. So there was it was very difficult then to unite and do something together.
Well, for those of us in the business, we pray they didn't get back together again, because it would never have been the same.
Well, also, I think that John's feeling was that there was such a myth about the Beatles, and if they did get back together again, it wouldn't have been the same. And I think the other three felt that way too, slowly.
Leave it alone. The Double Fantasy album was a marvelous album, and you really had major input into that one.
What I did then was, John told me that he's not going to do an album without me, and my feeling was, if I did louse it up for John by making music that is too far out, then I would not only feel guilty, but I would never live it down. So I was very careful in writing songs and putting songs that were more acceptable than something that was very experimental.
Were you happy with it, even though you were writing to make them acceptable? Were you pleased with what came out?
I was happy with most of them, I think, because there are a few things that I threw in, and it worked.
Yeah, Moving On was. Is there a favorite song of yours that
In there?
Yeah.
Of mine?
Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking, if it's a favorite song, for me, the favorite song is John's I'm Losing You, because it's an incredible song. I'm just talking artistically. Of course, women, beautiful boy, but John, those songs, on a personal level, it's just still hard to listen to, but I mean, it's something very personal, and I love them, of course, you know. But I'm Losing You is an incredible song, sung in a phenomenal way, I think. It's a very strong song. Well, my favorite song of mine is probably Give Me Something or Kiss, Kiss, Kiss. I mean, one of those.
John continued and been alive and been creating. What does he want to do? Did he just want to make a record every year and a half, or was there something he wanted to find new talent, create, write Broadway shows, write opera? What would have been?
Well, find new talent is the only thing that I don't think John would have wanted to do, because I know that he was still interested in his own talent. Though he was interested in production end of things, so I would never know. He might have gone into that. I think that the planning that we were doing was to go on a tour after the Double Fantasy, and also to do a musical on Broadway called Ballad of John and Yoko. Surprise, surprise. And then we were going to make a film. But that's about all. But that's
That's your.
That's hands full.
Oh, that's hands full. That's
And
5
then
years.
while we were doing that, of course, we would have thought of the next album. But we were thinking about Milk and Honey. That was already set, you know. We were going to make that film, a record. So after that record, probably we would have done another tour or something like that. I don't know how successful we could have been because the kind of planning that he was doing about it, but it might have been all right. I don't know.
Have you retained relationships with the other three from time to time, or is it when business calls, or was there nothing there to retain?
Well, I think that circumstances made us apart, very much apart, and also made it very difficult for us to communicate. But again, circumstances made us understand each other a lot, you know. It's a very complex situation. John and I were probably closer to Paul and Linda's situation more than any other couple in the world. And so we certainly understood what Paul and Linda were going through as a couple. Against or with the world, so to speak. And we know each other very well, you know.
Is it tough being Yoko Ono?
Well, I don't know any other life, so I wouldn't know. I think that I certainly got my share of things, good or bad. But it's interesting to know that there's so many things that I don't know, or I didn't know, and every day is a discovery. And it's just quite exciting to learn so much.
And,
I prefer that than to a life where you don't learn after a certain age, you know.
But you are visible. There's security and there's privacy and there's void arrays and things like that. But, it seems like you carry a weight with you. You know, you certainly carry it well, and you go about your
Well,
life.
it's a different kind of weight probably, but I think that all of us are carrying some kind of weight, and it's just a matter of a different kind of arrangement of life, you know. And I have one probably strength about me is that I'm very versatile, and this is the situation now, and I can cope with it.
Madeline, you and I have both heard the clip. What did you think of it?
I think it was wonderful because it's a rare instance where Yoko spoke at leisure and with very forthright about the Beatles and John's desire or not desire to ever reunite with them, and how they broke up and how she was involved in it. And it's just a very relaxed situation, and she's really saying a lot of interesting things.
One thing that she said specifically that you couldn't help but pay attention to was the fact that she didn't break up the Beatles. She definitely confirmed what everybody, realistically is saying, that, it was time. And actually, John didn't try to break up the Beatles first. Other members of the Beatles tried to quit the group before.
In that specific interview, she said that Ringo and Maureen came round to see John and Yoko, and they were the first, and then George, and then John. So
right,
that's an interesting little tidbit that, I knew that Ringo had left during the White Album sessions, and they cajoled him to get back and, told him, no, we love you, don't leave. But for him to have gone around to John and Yoko's residence at the time, that was interesting.
And another thing that was interesting was the fact that when she talked about the possibility of getting the group getting back together, that they all realized that it wasn't going to be the same. And they knew it was going to be difficult. because of that.
Well, the revelation there is that, she was saying if they were going to get back together, they would have done it in the 18 months that he was separated from her.
Right.
And he had 18 months there out on his own to do whatever he felt like doing. And he was with Paul in LA. They were hanging out. Ringo was there. George wasn't, but they could have definitely contacted George and done something. They were in studios all the time, right? In and out of studios. So that's it.
And I also like the part where she's talking about double fantasy.
She said, I toned myself down because I didn't want to, infiltrate on John's success. She elected to do songs with a beat and a melody, and she was specifically adhering to that.
She's mentioned numerous times that she knows that her music is not for everyone. Did you ever have a discussion with her about that specifically?
I'd be with her backstage and she'd be reading a review from a newspaper. She had a song called It's Time for Action, and they called it It's Time for Aspirin. So she was laughing. She didn't let it faze her, really. She was doing her art, and that's what it was. And, she said, I don't accommodate the audience. I ask the audience to accommodate in every aspect of her art. And when they put out Ono Box, they did that. She realized my fans have had a rough time of it, trying to get my albums, having them go out of print. So she was happy to put that set together for everyone.
Yeah, and it's interesting that she has always acknowledged that her art, her music was not the easiest thing to understand. And some artists, when they go off like that, aren't that accommodating. They expect you to understand. She was nice enough to where she didn't do that. And that was very kind of interesting to me that she did do that.
In fact, her Double Fantasy tour that was going to be, John said, oh, let's do all the freaky stuff and then we'll do I Want to Hold Your Hand. And she said, well, I don't know if that's going to go off too well.
Yeah, that was another thing about the clip that they had planned to do a tour, which I've seen multiple mentions of that before. I'm not sure I remember the Broadway show. I don't remember hearing about that.
I remember they were talking about a stage show, but she calls it The Ballad of John and Yoko in this interview, so that might have been it.
And of course, they had also been planning a film, which actually she did do later. In fact, they've done multiple films. So, I mean, it's been, that's been something they've been doing all along. And the one-to-one film is part of that. The Daytime Revolution is part of that. So, I mean, they're trying to, historically remember their accomplishments, which they have every right to do. And it's actually very good. I was a little sorry with the one-to-one film that they didn't do more of the concert and they didn't, and that the political events weren't linked as much to them as I wish they had been. However, we will see the concert coming out at the end of the year. So that's...
And I think Daytime Revolution does put all the political events in context.
Right.
If you see both of those films, you've got an amazing picture of that time.
Yeah, I really liked Daytime Revolution an awful lot.
Too.
I kind of wish they had done a deluxe set and brought back all the shows like Rhino did on VHS. Anything else you want to say about this clip? How does it add to the understanding of Yoko in general?
I think she's just very clear about not having chased John down, not having been knowing who the Beatles even were. She cites the articles that she saw about them. One when she was in Japan, and it was a tiny little article about this band of mop tops that were taking over the world, and they weren't in her cultural realm. She was listening to 12-tone composers and doing events, and she had her Chamber Street concert series in New York, hosting avant-garde composers. And then she read another article in Life magazine about them. It was like 2 weeks after the Ed Sullivan show. But she wouldn't have recognized them in the street, and people don't believe her. And all I know is that Yoko was always very, very honest. I mean, look, she told us they were doing heroin. She told us, all the problems they were having in their marriage. John was truthful as well. And they got hell for telling the truth. And people don't believe them and still accuse them of lying. And it just doesn't make sense to me. They were the most open book.
Madeline, this has been a lot of fun. I thank you for taking the time and talking about your book. Where can people get your book?
It's on Amazon, the softcover version, but this hardcover expanded version is only available through me at conceptualbooks.com. And there's an option of having it signed by me as well.
Okay. Again, Madeline, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
We had a chance this week to see Midas Man, the recent film about Brian Epstein. Parts of it were good, parts of it not so good. Some of the members of my Beatles News and Information group on Facebook, and you're welcome to come join us if you're not a member, said they didn't think the actors playing the Beatles looked like them at all, but I didn't really agree. I thought they were adequate, but it was frightening indeed to see Ed Sullivan portrayed by none other than Jay Leno. Overall, the finished movie really didn't embrace the title. It really didn't show much of how he built the empire, but had much of the focus on the seamier side of his life. If we had to give it a grade, we'd give it a C. It's on DVD and Blu-ray if you have to have it. And that's all for this time out. We'll be back soon with more of the best Beatles talk and the best Beatles guests. Please remember to subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And we would really appreciate it if you leave us a good review, because Apple loves good reviews. Till then, this is your host, Steve Marinucci, saying,
He's seeing you.
Keep that one. Mark it fab.